Hello and good afternoon, everyone, and good day for those around the world. Today, we have a very special guest and a very special episode. It's about scenario thinking, and it's presented by our guest, Mohamed Marwan. He's an expert in business transformation for over 20 years experience building strong teams, business models, capabilities, and growth platforms. He worked at Scala Business Solutions, General Electric Healthcare Technologies, and Almentor, where he managed multiple territories and profit and loss in emerging markets and executed customer projects for more than 12 countries in the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and Southeast Asia. During his journey, he has accumulated this experience through an exciting list of consulting engagements for clients in EMEA and through different business leadership roles in emerging markets. Learning continues to be one of his core passions. Currently, he's a doctorate researcher in strategy and innovation. He also teaches business model innovation and organizational management at the American University in Cairo Executive Management Program. Mohammed has MSc and MBA degrees, plus several international certifications in technology, manufacturing, supply chain, and project management. Welcome, Mohammed, to the program. And I really am amazed by and with the idea of your book and the what comes in with scenario thinking. And welcome to our Innovation Creed weekly podcast. Thank you.
Mohammed, thank you very much, and welcome everybody to this meeting, and thanks for the introduction, of course. And yeah, I'm super excited to join you as well. So let's start full speed ahead.
Yeah. So where do you like to start? Especially, when I was talking to you about the scenario thinking, you were talking to me about, how it works with the VUCA world that we have these days. So I would love actually to learn from you how you use it actually in strategy. Especially, I know that you've already been there doing strategies for multiple organizations, and you are always ahead of your time. So tell me how this applies.
Thanks, Mohammed. So yeah, our world. It has been going on a very accelerated pace even before the last 2 years, and the last 2 years have taught us, lots of heavy lessons. I would say, and there were kind of like two I would say schools of thought. One is that the world is too complicated, chaotic, surprising, scary, that there is no need for all of this planning in advance and so on. And there is the other school that we still need some sort of planning. And of course, it depends on your quality of planning, how you will come up with the strategy and how you will come up with your next steps. About scenarios, I've been always working with the concept of scenarios in my job or even in my personal life, but more in my roles where I was leader. I was responsible for big teams, working between developing strategy and executing it as well. And there has always been surprises. So you start with a plan at the beginning of the year, but then something else happens, restructuring, a market changes, political turmoil somewhere. So there's always action going on. But I've also found that the quality by which you can imagine the future, okay, helps you a lot in dealing with all of this kind of VUCA, the volatility, the uncertainty, and other, I would say, adverse effects of our world. And this is where a long time back I started with, trying to develop my skills on what are the different scenarios that you can have. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if the 2 or 3 points that will most probably happen, but then you leave 2 or 3 action items that you're still wondering whether they will happen or not. And believe it or not, they helped a lot. One of the things that I really learned the hard way, especially when working with project managers and project directors on complicated or complex projects, is that the ones who are doing really well, or the ones who perform well on projects, are the ones who in advance can imagine the future with a good level of detail. Okay, they are able to see what can happen in the future. You ask them questions, they articulate what will or what might happen. Their quality of planning is is high quality. Okay, and so I would say the best of the project managers that I have worked with on all of those projects in different countries were the ones that had this skill of imagining scenarios and embedding it in the project plan as well. So yeah, it's a VUCA world. It doesn't mean that we just sit and wait and nothing matters. No, still the quality of your planning and the quality by which you can imagine the future plays a big role in your success.
So, what do you like to actually, how do you like to work on, presenting the scenario thinking, and how you do it? Especially, I know that you wrote already a book about it, and
Okay.
I'm really privileged to have you on air for the first time, talking
Okay.
about the methodology, the thinking, and how scenario thinking, how it works, So,
Okay. Great question. So, first of all, let's define what scenarios are. I mean, the word itself comes from a Latin word that means scene. Okay, so scenario is like seeing, a specific scene, and the scenario is a story. So if you imagine that you're on stage and you're telling a story or telling the scenario, you're actually telling somebody a story. And one of the, very nice quote that I found for a famous writer. Maybe she's not that famous. She's a British one, and she says everything is a story. You are a story. I'm a story. We're all stories. And when you look this and when you look into this and you really apply it in whether business, professional life, or your personal one, we always start with stories. Like the CEO said this, or the CEO visited the country, and this happens, and then they met somebody else, they met a customer, the customer was complaining, and then this happened. Or somebody in the innovation team came up with something, there was a good story about it, they came up with a new product, and so on. So scenarios are stories about and the future. And the more you are able to tell this story and articulate it in the right way, like any other story, it becomes more engaging. And this is where I wanted to actually link to two concepts in my book, which is called "You're Gonna Need a Bigger Boat." Okay, um, it's it's about how you can imagine the future using thinking skills that need some kind of an upgrade. Now, what does this actually mean? We just said the world is becoming complicated, volatile, uncertain. The way we used to think about things before or future events will not work in the same way. And this is where you need some kind of upgrade to your thinking capabilities. And based on that, I merged this with the process of scenario thinking itself. And so I'm talking about what are those thinking skills by which you need to build scenarios in a proper way. So a scenario is a story about the future. If I tell you tomorrow, for example, the world is going to end tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Okay, frankly, this is not a very interesting or exciting story, right? Because there's nothing much to do. It doesn't provoke me to do an action. There's just very little time to do anything, and it's inevitable as well. If you say the world's going to end, then it's going to end. But really good scenarios are stories that have open endings, that have characters, that have excitements, that have climax, that have some sort of a conflict where you really don't know whether the electric vehicles will take over the standard vehicles in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, and so on. So, there is always room for imagination, room for opportunities, room to make you actually part of this story so that you can kind of be empowered, take action, and feel responsible. Because if you're not part of the story, then hands off, and you're not part of that anymore. So this is where I fall in love with scenarios, and I kind of drafted a simplified framework on how to do scenario thinking as well. Maybe we can talk about where are scenarios actually useful. Would you like us to get into that as well?
yes, that's a very good point to go for. And I guess there is something that you said that really clicked with me. It's about the stories, and everything is a story. It's very engaging when somebody is actually putting the business and its transformation and its teams. And this is where most of the compelling leaders actually are, and engaging leaders are going through storytelling. But how can we use this as a professional tool for building strategies? That's very a real eye opener, and thank you for that. And I really love it.
Yeah, I
So
think there's loads of stuff to borrow from storytelling and maybe put it in a more um, business acceptable format, if I would put it this way. Okay, some people might think that storytelling is is kind of a personal entertainment type of thing, but actually, when you look into scenarios, you analyze them. You analyze them with metrics, with events. You find that it's a wonderful mix between science and art. And what you see here on this screen, it tells you actually where are scenarios useful. So scenarios are not the magic potion that can fix everything. Scenarios work at a specific range of time when you look into the future. So if you see here on the screen, the x-axis is the time, and the y-axis is to what extent you know the future in terms of details. So when you have a very, very short term, this is more towards prognosis. And this is borrowed from the medical term when somebody goes to a doctor and you make analysis or tests, and then you come up with the conclusion that something will happen, or already within the coming few days you need to make a surgery, operation, you need to take a medicine, and so on. This is where there is very high certainty, okay, and you actually know everything. You kind of know what is the case exactly, what will happen, and so on. And by time, we see the blue curve that your predictability goes down, and at the same time the uncertainty goes high. As scenarios work best where there is kind of the intersection between both. So over a specific range of time, let's say scenarios are better working with extended number of months or a few number of years. This is where you kind of start to get a mix of quantitative imagination of the future and qualitative one as well. Okay, so the story has numbers, but the story also has events and incidents and characters and so on. And this is where scenarios give you, they actually, what they do is that they give you all the plausible outcomes that can happen. Okay, so scenarios are not about probability. You don't say that this scenario is going to happen with 60% probability or 20% probability. This is not at all the objective of scenarios. Scenarios are there to make you imagine all the possible plausible futures that can happen, and then based on that you start a whole another different process where you can feed this back into your strategic management cycle. Okay, if you look at the COVID scenario, yes, it might have been people would think it's very improbable, but also it's not that improbable. It's one of the plausible scenarios that a virus can take place and spread all over the world in a matter of months. Okay, that's the scenario. And when you look back in history, and you look at history not just from a matter of a few years, but you look into like 100 years or so, the Spanish flu, when it happened 100 years back, that was also another scenario that's just 90 years behind us. So this is where scenarios do best. And then when you get into the really long-term future, the world becomes very uncertain, predictability is very low, and this is where you start the kind of hazy zone of just hope, speculation, gambling. You're imagining a utopia or a perfect one that that will never happen, or you're imagining something that is totally doom and gloom. So scenarios are the ones in the middle where you can really apply them in the right way.
Wow. So that's amazing. So in a way, you integrate or the period after the prognosis period, you collect information, data, analytics, put different alternatives, and maybe put for each alternative a weight or something, so that you can. Is this how you qualitatively look at and quantitatively look at the data and the information that you have?
For scenarios specifically, the focus is actually how to come up with a very coherent, plausible, logical, exciting scenario or story of the future where where your stakeholders or your audience are engaged. Okay, once we get into this phase or process, and then we say, okay, you know what, we have, for what we're discussing now, or the question we're trying to answer, we have four scenarios, or we have seven or 16, depending on how complex the exercise is or how comprehensive it is. Then starts another process, which is about assigning probabilities, taking actions, feeding this back into your strategic plan, maybe assigning budgets to scenarios. If this happens, then we need whatever, $200,000. If this happens, then we need an additional 1 million on top of that. But the process I'm mainly focusing about, especially in my book, is how to create the scenario in a way that makes it at a later stage, like what I said, makes it actionable. How when you narrate this scenario as a story, it becomes plausible, coherent, exciting. Your stakeholders, they feel they are part of this story. Okay, they're not distanced from that. And if we can have the next slide, where let me share the next one. Yeah, those are examples of scenarios. Okay, and in the book as well, I shared examples from different parts of the world in different fields. And scenarios are not just linked to corporate organizations who are trying to make their 5-year plan and come up with the top line and the bottom line. What you see here is a typical 2x2 scenario framework. So this is where, exactly almost after 1 year after Nelson Mandela was released from prison in South Africa, the country wanted to open up to its future, and they really wanted to imagine, okay, what will happen. And of course, there are lots of political issues, social issues, economical issues, and so on. And they gathered in one place. It's a very famous hotel, which is called the Montfleur Hotel. And they said, okay, let's imagine the future of our country. And there were, I think, 22 representatives from different parties and different parts of the country, with different backgrounds. And they imagined that to really decide what scenarios we have, you work on two axes, as you can see here on the slide. So one is about the policies. So the next government, what kind of policies will they implement? Are they going to be decisive ones or indecisive policies? Are they going to be representing the government or non-representative of the government, the political landscape itself? And based on that, they came up with four stories. Okay, the first one, which is the ostrich, and for scenarios you always give names because stories have names. So the ostrich is the one where policies are indecisive, the government is non-representative of the people, and this is kind of the worst scenario. And the ostrich is just putting its head in the sand. The one that's completely on the other side, which is the flight of the flamingos, mean that the country is going to grow. The policies are very decisive. It's going to be fast recovery for the country. The government is representing the people with all the different groups within South Africa. And as you see, the flight of the flamingos shows the grace and the success of the country. Then you have kind of two scenarios where it's a bit complicated story. So there's a lame duck. Okay, so it's a duck. It's moving, but it has issues. On the other side, there is Icarus, which is going high, but then can go down again and fall from the success. And this is simply how you present a scenario. You work on two different axes, and you say, okay, the combination of this and that is scenario number one, this and that scenario number two. And what you see in front of you is how did the people in Montfleur see the four scenarios of South Africa. So this is just one example of how this is an anatomy of the scenario, actually.
Wow. So I believe that giving these two polarities, or giving two axes for this decision making and the representation, for this, it's very symbolic for what kind of desired outcomes you want from the scenarios, so that you work your efforts in building the thing that you really want.
Mhm.
So I really loved how they prepared the facilitator who prepared this was really a good one, you know.
Yeah, I would imagine, because also one thing about scenarios is that, okay, if 22 people are working on this, you need to go out and communicate it to millions. How can
Yeah,
you use a language that really explains such a very complicated case? You know, South Africa, after the release of Mandela, the collapse of the apartheid system, and we're talking about the future of a country who's, I think, is the fourth or fifth largest country in Africa. How do you communicate it in just, four titles of stories? And you give the indication that, ostrich is most probably a bad scenario, flamingos is a good scenario, and so on. And like what we just said, those scenarios, they don't have probabilities. There are no numbers here.
yeah.
It's summarized as saying that, okay, if we want to look into the future, these are the most plausible stories that we have for the future of our country. And then starts another process about, assigning probabilities, numbers, forecasts. Then when the exercise turns into something else. But one of the main drawbacks when you start designing scenarios or imagining the futures is that you start in advance with numbers in mind. This can make your thinking process very biased. Okay, because especially in the corporate world, where we want a specific target or number or a growth percent for the coming 5 years, we kind of want to force the scenario to go in that direction, the 5% growth scenario, or opening two new markets, with a 50% success rate. Now, scenarios do not have the numbers as one of their attributes. It's all about, are they is it possible that such a story exists in the future or not? And then you work it backwards for numbers.
So okay, so you start off with the possibility, or you open up your imagination with all the desired scenarios or inputs or whatever coming in, and then you start to quantify afterwards the possibilities and looking at the number and the financials and everything, right?
Exactly, because where you need to invest is actually how to make the quality of this story about the future a high quality one. Okay, characters, who's going to do what, the intersection of different events, the intersection of trends. You need to understand, is it really coherent, or what you're saying is nobody will believe what you're saying? And if this is the case, is it because this imagination of the future is actually wrong, or is it just because that it's too unlikely and people are not believing it? Okay.
Okay.
So this is where, yeah, you need to focus a lot on the quality of your story, the quality of building the scenario itself. And some scenarios, they take pages and pages to explain what exactly is happening in this scenario. In the same way, you write a story. There are stories of, it can be a 2-page story, or it can be a 300-page story.
Yeah. So that's very, very clear, Muhammad. I really appreciate what you're bringing here. And so for teams who do not do this until now, like they're totally into, and what I believe is most of the teams that I see are
Okay.
either doing the prognosis, like they're bringing in the current situation, like putting everything, like working like in a firefighting mode or something like this is something.
Mhm.
And when they look at future thinking strategies or something, they look in the very far future, 5 years or above, into and they are not good at putting scenarios as much as they're putting a vision, a very inspiring thing. But this part in the middle is an art, I believe, that has to have somebody who's really putting a lot of mind and effort in it.
Mhm.
So how can organizations who still don't do this or don't put a lot of time and effort in scenarios thinking, catch up with the changing world of VUCA? How can they catch up? Yeah, they start putting this in mind and start asking for such or start actually seeking this service or seeking this way of thinking, let's put it like this?
Okay. A great question. The I would propose that the starting point is actually the company asking itself, or every team and their leader asking themselves, is how do we see the future? Okay, because the move from that, we're everyday business as usual, and then all of a sudden, guys, we need to plan for next year. Can you please give me the projections of the growth, the numbers, the inventory, the sales, and so on, without going through a phase where how do we imagine this future is just number crunching and number patching. Okay, it's just because there is usually what happens is that you think, and some people even believe, that the future is going to be a carbon copy of the present with some factor. Okay, add 5%, reduce 20%, do this, do that, and that it's a linear continuation of the previous year. And regardless of how many times people get surprised that the future is not a continuation of the present, it's not an extrapolation of the present, we still lack like this. So what I would usually advise is actually to get start somewhere, have just a 1 day workshop, the leader with his or her team getting together, trying to imagine themselves in a year or two from now. Remember, also, scenarios are not about 5 or 10 years. Okay, you can do it much closer than that. If you want to say, where are we going to be in 2 years from this? The question that we always make fun of that in interviews when somebody's asking another person, where do you see yourself in 2 or 5 years or so? I think we're missing that. If this person does not have the capability to imagine a future, then whatever he or she says is wrong. Okay, because the ability to imagine a future does not exist. So whatever they say, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that, it doesn't work this way. So get together, a 1 day workshop. Let's understand. I think from a leadership perspective, a leader needs to understand exactly how does the team see the future of their team or their company or their country. Because when you work on a plan that is totally irrelevant, but then when you dig deeper with those scenarios and you see that most of the futures that those teams are seeing is completely contradicting with the leader's version of the future, this is where you start, digging into the root causes of the problems that we're going to have. Why, after 3 months down the line in the new year, by end of March, we're still 30% behind our target? Why the promotions didn't take place? Why the competitor is gaining more market share? A long list of questions. And a big chunk of that can be attributed that we did not invest much time in thinking about scenarios. Once this happens for a first time, and it will not be easy because it might not be that natural, then it becomes kind of a systematic process, all the way till a company like Shell, who I wouldn't say kind of invented scenario planning in the 70s with the crisis of the oil in the 70s. It became, as a discipline in the company, that there is a team and a department responsible for imagining the futures, the possible futures with scenarios. It's not going to be very natural, but I believe, and I promise you, it's going to be super exciting, especially when you go out there and you start drawing the scenario with characters, with people, with men and women and competitors and dollar signs, and giving numbers, the ostrich, the Icarus, the flamingos. It's going to be a very interesting exercise.
Okay, so that's amazing. Mohammed, do you like to share some of your experiences with working with scenarios? For would you like to tell us a story about it?
Sure. When you work for a long time, regardless of the title of the job itself, but when you're mostly involved in projects or programs that start with a specific vision of the future in mind, whether it's a simple a platform for a very small number of users, all the way till a big business transformation program where things are going to turn upside down in 2 years' time. You run into those points where you start with a certain vision of the future. Okay, like and usually sometimes it's a naive one. Like in 6 months' time, the implementation is going to be over, and it's going to be a happy ending for everyone. But then, like what happens in our world, so many things change. Budgets, priorities. Some people are leaving the project. Some stakeholders from the customer side are changing. Flights are canceled. Somebody becomes sick. The whole strategy for a company shifts from the system that you're going to implement to something totally different. The culture and the strategy of the company changes. A business model becomes obsolete and you need to innovate a new one. All of those kinds of changes that you go through in a project, or specifically a 1 or 2 years transformational program, gives you the capacity to imagine a future, find out after some time that it didn't happen this way, so you have another set of alternatives as well. There are different possible futures, for this company, for this team. And this is what I learned it the hard way. There were scenarios that I imagined that were fairly. The worst one was still going to be a good scenario anyway, and I planned it this way. I was surprised. I was something totally different happened. Now there can always be a debate whether you missed that scenario. Okay, so your kind of scenario thinking process wasn't that comprehensive, or is it that this is a surprise that nobody was seeing coming? When you look into the corporate world, whether implementations that I did with the Scala Business Solutions or transformation programs with General Electric, and there was a very good solid plan for them over 1 or 2 years time. Things things do not end in the way that you planned in advance. And this is where sometimes I have discussions with teams who are, let's say, a bit on the early stages of their career, whether they're project managers or others. And I would advise them that the standard way of planning, putting a plan for the project, resources, activity, WBS, and all what we know about project management is not enough anymore. Maybe it's not clear on the plan or the Gantt chart, but what is very essential is the fabric of this plan that you're putting, or the roadmap for your implementation or transformation program, whether it's digital transformation or business. How do you embed scenarios in those plans? Project managers need to develop this kind of skills and upgrade their cognitive abilities. And part of that, I'm talking about it in my book as well.
Okay, so that's amazing. Thanks, Mohammed, for sharing this. I would love actually actually I've just seen the time now. We've past 30 minutes, as
Okay.
really have. So I would love actually to have something like a very short, learning from the day, just as a quick nugget, somebody, whoever is following us can take it from this amazing conversation.
Okay, you mean from the process of writing the book, or the whole story about scenarios? From both of them. Okay.
Both of them.
So yeah, the one is invest in the future. Okay, we all need the new skills every day. It's not just about focus, but it's actually, future is a topic that needs to be part of your present. Get your future now. Learn from the future. Okay, I mean, it didn't happen yet, but there are so many ways where we can guess how it will happen. Look for signals. And this is where you need to build a plan for yourself, and also scenarios. Okay, what if I don't do this? What if I don't travel there? What will happen? If this project works, this doesn't work. If I want to be specialized in data science, but then something else happens. So keep the future very close. This is, I would say, number one. The second part is learning. Okay, part of what I'm talking about in the book is after we do all of this process and scenario, and there are lots of details, but what do we do with this learning that we get? Okay, and this is where you need to reinvest in your cycle as well. So get your future closer, learn from it, the good stuff, the mistakes that will make you better next time, and then complete or repeat the cycle again. So keep your future closer to you. Mohammed, we cannot hear you.
It is an amazing advice, and how, looking at, looking for the signals from the future, and then learning from what happened in the past and what happens from the future, also to learn from the future and keep repeating this process. It's really amazing. It's really a very profound advice. And thank you for that, Mohammed. And
Thank you.
yeah, if you like to talk for 1 minute or something about your book, that would be great. If you like to, so that if somebody wants to maybe buy it or purchase it, how can they find it? Yeah.
Sure. So the book is called You're Gonna Need a Bigger Boat. And why did I choose this title? Because it's the famous title from the movie Jaws, when the crew on the boat, they saw the big shark for the first time opening its mouth, and then they said, we're going to need a bigger boat because there's no way you can fight this shark on that small boat. And the shark is the future. Okay, our future with all the exciting and scary stuff needs a bigger boat. So in the book, I talk about future thinking skills, how to think about the future, how to think about scenario thinking. There's a kind of a framework that you apply. You will get good insights on how to think about this future. There's a combination of stories over there, things from history, philosophy, technology, artificial intelligence. It's a mix of different stories that we can learn a lot from the past and the future as well. The book is available on Amazon.com. You can get it through paperback format or Kindle. It's on Barnes and Noble, Apple Books, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. And I hope that I will add value to the development of all the audience. Back to you.
Thank you, Mohammed. It's really amazing, and thanks actually for sharing this with our audience. And thanks for being the first on the first live with me, and that's really a pleasure. And thanks for everyone who was actually following us in this episode. I want to thank you, Mohammed, for all your time, your experience, sharing, your openness, and your generosity for this session. And who wants to contact Mohammed, the contacts are actually on the reel down there, mohammed.marwan.personal@gmail.com. And there's also the LinkedIn profile of Mohammed for, if you want to have a look on scenario thinking that happens in your organizations. Thank you, Mohammed. I appreciate your time.
Mohammed. Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody who's following us. Thank you. All the best. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.